My sister-in-law posted condolences for my grandmother's death 3 hours before she died, so I used her own intuition to back her into a corner she couldn't escape. The notification came while I was holding my grandmother's hand in the ICU. I almost didn't look at my phone because Grandma Ruth's breathing had gotten shallow in the last hour, and the doctor said it could be any minute now. But the screen lit up with Vanessa's name, and I glanced down out of habit. What I saw made my grip tighten on Ruth's fingers so hard that the nurse glanced over with concern. Vanessa had posted a full memorial tribute. Photo of my grandmother from Christmas, paragraphs about loss and grief and how much she'd meant to the family, dozens of people already commenting their condolences and sharing memories. I checked the timestamp twice because my brain refused to process it. Posted 3 hours ago at 2:47 in the afternoon. Grandma Ruth was still breathing beside me. Her heart monitor was still beeping its steady rhythm. She was dying, yes, but she wasn't dead. The doctors had given us maybe 6 more hours, and here was my sister-in-law already collecting sympathy and attention for a death that hadn't happened yet. My husband Derek walked back into the room with 2 cups of terrible hospital coffee, and I showed him the screen without saying anything. I watched his face as he read through Vanessa's post, watched the confusion spread across his features, and then harden into something darker. He stared at it for a full 30 seconds before his expression changed into something I'd never seen before, this mix of disbelief and dawning horror. He handed me back my phone and walked straight out into the hallway. I followed him and watched as he called his sister right there in the ICU corridor, while nurses gave us disapproving looks about phone usage. Vanessa answered on the 4th ring, her voice bright and cheerful like she was having a perfectly normal day. "Hey, big brother, what's up?" Derek's voice came out tight and controlled. "Why did you post that Grandma Ruth died?" "She's still alive, Vanessa." There was a pause on the other end, just long enough to feel calculated, and then Vanessa gasped like she'd only just realized her mistake. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I scheduled it wrong. I was preparing something in advance so I wouldn't be too emotional to write it properly when the time came, and the post went up early by accident. I feel awful about this." Her words came out smooth and practiced, like she'd been expecting this call and had her explanation ready. Derek wanted to believe her. I could see it in the way his shoulders relaxed slightly, in how quickly he seemed willing to accept her reasoning. But something felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate yet. Something about the timing being so precise, about how she'd known to schedule it for that exact window. "How did you know when to schedule it?" I asked, loud enough for Vanessa to hear me through the phone. There was another pause, and when she answered, her voice had an edge to it. "The doctors gave you a timeline this morning. You told me 6 hours. I just did the math wrong." Derek hung up after a few more awkward exchanges, and we went back into Grandma Ruth's room. She looked so small in that hospital bed, surrounded by machines and tubes and monitors. I sat down and took her hand again, but my mind was racing. The doctors had told us 6 hours that morning, yes, but that had been at 9 in the morning. Vanessa's post had gone up at 2:47. That wasn't 6 hours. That was barely more than 5, and Grandma Ruth was still hanging on. How had Vanessa been so confident in her timing that she'd scheduled a memorial post for a death that hadn't occurred yet? My grandmother died 40 minutes later at 6:38 in the evening. Vanessa's post had been up for 3 hours and 51 minutes by then. I watched the life leave Ruth's body, watched the monitors go from their steady rhythms to flat lines, and the whole time I kept thinking about those 3 hours, about how Vanessa had been collecting condolences and sympathy while my grandmother was still fighting for breath. Derek cried and held Ruth's other hand, and I cried too, but part of my brain was stuck on that Facebook post and the wrongness of it. At the funeral 3 days later, Vanessa cried harder than anyone. She flew in from Arizona where she lived and worked as a pharmaceutical sales rep, and from the moment she arrived, she made herself the center of attention. She wore all black with this delicate veil that made her look like something from an old movie. She brought an enormous arrangement of white lilies and made sure everyone saw her carrying them into the church. During the service, she gave a speech about how close she and Grandma Ruth had been, about dreams and premonitions and special connections between souls. I sat in the front pew listening to her describe a relationship I'd never witnessed. Vanessa lived 4 states away and visited maybe twice a year for major holidays. She'd never shown particular interest in Grandma Ruth before, had spent most family gatherings on her phone or finding excuses to leave early. But now she was painting herself as Ruth's devoted confidant, talking about late-night phone calls and shared secrets that I was certain had never happened. People kept coming up to her after the service, telling her how lucky my grandmother was to have had such a devoted granddaughter-in-law. Derek hugged his sister and told her it was okay. Everyone grieves differently. And I watched Vanessa's face over his shoulder. For just a second, I saw something cold and satisfied in her eyes before the grief mask slid back into place. That night, I couldn't sleep. Derek was out cold next to me, exhausted from grief and the emotional weight of the funeral, but I lay there staring at the ceiling and thinking about those 3 hours. About Vanessa's too perfect timing. About her speech full of fabricated memories. About that look in her eyes when people told her how devoted she'd been. At 2 in the morning, I gave up on sleep and grabbed my phone, opening Facebook and navigating to Vanessa's profile. I started scrolling through her timeline, going back months. At first, I wasn't sure what I was looking for. just some confirmation of the feeling in my gut that something was deeply wrong. Normal posts about her job, photos of her apartment, check-ins at restaurants and hiking trails around Phoenix. Then I found something that made my blood run cold. 2 months earlier, she'd posted condolences to a woman named Patricia Lowell, saying she was heartbroken to hear about her passing and that Patricia had been such a light in their community. I clicked on Patricia's profile and found her very much alive, posting photos from a garden party just last week. Then I noticed the dates more carefully. Vanessa's condolence post was from March 8th. Patricia's garden party photos were from March 6th. But when I scrolled down further on Patricia's page, I found what I was looking for. A memorial post from Patricia's daughter, dated March 15th. Patricia Lowell had died 6 days after Vanessa posted condolences for her death. My hands started shaking. I went back to Vanessa's timeline and kept scrolling, and now I knew what pattern to look for. A man named Gregory Chen. Vanessa had posted about being devastated to lose such an inspiring member of their gym community, posted on August 2nd of last year. I found Gregory's obituary online showing he'd died August 11th, 9 days later. A woman named Alice Brennan. Sympathy post from Vanessa on November 19th about what a pillar of their church Alice had been. I found Alice's profile and she was still alive, but she'd posted on November 23rd about being hospitalized for severe complications that nearly killed her. By the time the sun came up, I documented 7 cases. 7 times over the past 18 months that Vanessa had posted about someone's death or expressed sympathy for their passing before it actually happened. 5 of those people had died within 2 weeks of her posts. The other 2 had experienced severe medical emergencies that put them in the hospital. I sat at our kitchen table with my laptop open, creating a spreadsheet and cross-referencing everything I could find. Names, dates, time gaps between Vanessa's posts and actual deaths or medical crises. I pulled up obituaries and news articles and Facebook profiles, documenting every detail. Derek found me at the kitchen table at 6 in the morning, surrounded by printouts and notes and my laptop with about 20 browser tabs open. He looked at the mess I'd created and then at my face, and whatever he saw there made him sit down without saying anything. I turned my laptop toward him and showed him everything. The spreadsheet, the timeline, the pattern of Vanessa posting condolences before people died. He read through it all in silence, his face getting paler with each new piece of evidence. "She's a pharmaceutical sales rep," I said quietly when he'd finished reading. "She has access to medications, blood thinners, insulin, cardiac drugs, chemotherapy agents, pain management medications. She knows dosages and drug interactions and what would look natural versus suspicious." Derek's face went white. He kept shaking his head like he could physically reject what the evidence was showing him. But his hands were trembling when he reached for my laptop to scroll back through the spreadsheet. "There has to be another explanation," he said, but his voice had no conviction in it. "People post things at weird times sometimes. Maybe she just has bad intuition about when people are going to die." I pulled up Vanessa's LinkedIn profile and showed him her employment history. 3 years at a pharmaceutical company that specialized in cardiac medications and anticoagulants. Before that, 2 years at a company focused on diabetes management drugs. She had access to everything she'd need to cause the exact kinds of deaths I'd documented. "If you're wrong about this, you'll destroy her life," Derek said, and his voice cracked on the word destroy. "If we accuse her of murder and we're wrong, our entire family will never forgive us. We need to be absolutely sure before we do anything with this information." I nodded because he was right. What I had was a pattern, but patterns could be coincidence. I needed proof that would hold up beyond my spreadsheet and my gut feeling that something was terribly wrong. I started making phone calls that afternoon. Patricia Lowell's daughter Rebecca answered on the 3rd ring when I called the number listed in Patricia's obituary. I introduced myself as someone researching unexpected complications in end-of-life care for hospice patients, which wasn't exactly a lie. Rebecca was surprisingly willing to talk, eager maybe to process her mother's death with someone who seemed interested. She told me that her mother had been improving, that the hospice nurses had said she might have months left instead of weeks. "Then she just declined so fast," Rebecca said, and I could hear the confusion still in her voice even months later. "It was 48 hours from feeling okay to gone. They said it was a blood clot, sudden and massive, and there was nothing anyone could have done about it. But it seemed so strange because she'd been stable for weeks." I asked if anyone had visited Patricia in those final days, trying to keep my voice neutral and professional. Rebecca's answer made my stomach drop. "A lovely young woman from church stopped by with flowers the day before Mom died," Rebecca said. "I'd never seen her before, but she said she was part of the community outreach program. She sat with Mom for about an hour while I ran some errands. When I got back, she was just leaving. She seemed so sweet and caring." Rebecca described the woman and everything matched Vanessa perfectly. The right age, the right hair color, even the right mannerisms. I thanked Rebecca for her time and hung up with my heart pounding. I called Gregory Chen's widow next. Her number was listed on his obituary website under family contacts. She picked up after several rings, sounding tired and wary of an unknown number. I gave her the same introduction about researching unexpected complications, and she opened up immediately. She told me about how Gregory had been fighting cancer but responding well to treatment, His oncologist had been optimistic just days before he died. Then this woman from his gym brought him a smoothie and some supplements, Gregory's widow said. She was so thoughtful, said they were supposed to help with treatment side effects. Gregory took them and seemed fine at first, but that night he had what the doctors called an unexplained cardiac event, just sudden and massive. They couldn't save him. She described the woman, and again everything matched Vanessa. I asked if she still had the supplements, and she said no. She'd thrown them away in her grief and anger at their uselessness. I tracked down Alice Brennan through her church's directory and called her directly. She answered on the first ring, sounding cheerful and healthy. I explained that I was researching adverse drug reactions in community settings, and she immediately had a story for me. This pharmaceutical rep stopped by my house about 6 months ago, Alice said. She was going door to door offering free samples of a new blood pressure medication. She was so professional and friendly, and I'd been meaning to talk to my doctor about my blood pressure anyway, so I took one of the pills. Alice told me that within hours she'd been in the hospital with dangerously low blood pressure and kidney dysfunction. The doctors had been baffled because the medication she described wasn't supposed to cause that kind of reaction at normal doses. They'd stabilized her and sent her home with strict instructions never to take that medication again. I wish I'd kept the sample package so I could remember what it was called, Alice said, but I was so scared I threw it away. The pharmaceutical rep never came back or followed up, which seemed strange for someone making sales calls. I spent the rest of the week tracking down every person on my list who was still alive or whose family I could reach. The pattern held across all of them. Vanessa had visited or contacted each person in the days before they died or nearly died. She'd brought medications, supplements, smoothies, food items, always with some plausible excuse about being helpful or thoughtful. And then people had sudden medical crises that looked natural enough that no one had questioned them. I compiled everything into a folder. My spreadsheet with dates and timelines. Transcripts of my phone calls with family members. Screenshots of Vanessa's Facebook posts with timestamps. Her employment history showing her access to medications. Obituaries and hospital records I'd managed to obtain through various means. When I was done, I had 40 pages of documentation that painted a picture too clear to be coincidence. Derek looked through everything that weekend. I watched him read page after page, watched his face change as he was forced to confront what his sister might be. When he finished, he sat in silence for a long time. "We have to take this to the police," he finally said. "If there's even a chance you're right, we can't just sit on this information. But I need you to understand what this will do to my family if we're wrong." I understood. If I was wrong, I was accusing my sister-in-law of being a serial killer based on Facebook posts and phone calls with strangers. If I was right, Derek's sister had murdered our grandmother and at least 4 other people I could prove. Possibly more. Either way, our family would never be the same. We drove to the police station in Grandma Ruth's hometown that Monday morning. I carried my folder of evidence like it might explode if I held it wrong. Detective Karen Wolfe met with us in a small interview room that smelled like burnt coffee and industrial cleaner. She was a woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she had the kind of face that had seen enough horror that nothing much surprised her anymore. I laid out my entire presentation, walking her through each case, each pattern, each piece of evidence I'd compiled. She took notes on a yellow legal pad and asked occasional questions, but mostly just listened. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and studied me for a long moment. "This is concerning," she said carefully, "but it's also largely circumstantial. We'd need to exhume bodies for toxicology reports, get detailed medical records, prove chain of custody for any medications. That's a massive undertaking for what might ultimately be coincidence or bad timing." I felt my heart sink because I'd known this might happen. Patterns aren't proof. Suspicions aren't evidence. I was about to thank her for her time when my phone buzzed with a notification. I pulled it out and saw that Vanessa had posted a new Instagram story. I opened it with Derek and Detective Wolfe both looking over my shoulder. The story showed a coffee cup on a patio table with a sunrise in the background. The caption read, "Going to miss these morning coffee chats with my neighbor Gerald. Such a special soul." The way she'd written it, the past tense language, made my blood run cold. I pulled up Vanessa's flight information that I'd memorized from her earlier texts to Derek. She was scheduled to fly back to Arizona that afternoon. "She just posted about her neighbor Gerald Kaufman like he's already gone," I said to Detective Wolfe, showing her the Instagram story. "But I checked his Facebook this morning and he posted yesterday about his garden. She's doing it again." Detective Wolfe's expression changed immediately. She picked up her phone and dialed a number, putting it on speaker. "I need a welfare check on Gerald Kaufman in Mesa, Arizona. Right now. This is urgent." She gave them the address I'd found through public record searches and told them to have units standing by at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport. We waited in tense silence for 40 minutes that felt like hours. I watched Derek's face as he processed what was happening, the reality that we might be about to catch his sister in the act of attempting murder. When Detective Wolfe's phone finally rang, I could barely breathe. "Paramedics found him unresponsive," she said after listening for a moment. "Still alive, but barely. They're running labs now." She listened some more and her expression went hard. "Elevated insulin levels in a non-diabetic man. Someone tried to kill him. She started barking orders into the phone about stopping Vanessa before she could board her flight, about preserving the scene, about treating it as an attempted murder investigation. Then she turned to us. I need your husband to call his sister right now. Keep her on the phone and act completely normal. Don't let her know anything's wrong. We need her calm and unsuspecting when officers approach her at the airport. Derek looked like he might be sick. His hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone and dialed Vanessa's number. I could see him trying to compose himself, trying to sound normal when his whole world was falling apart. Vanessa answered on the second ring. Hey, big brother. What's up? Her voice was cheerful and relaxed, completely unburdened by guilt or fear. Just wanted to say goodbye before your flight, Derek said, and his voice was remarkably steady. Thanks for being here this week. I know it meant a lot to have family around. Vanessa made a sympathetic sound. Of course. Family is everything. I just wish we'd had more time with Grandma Ruth. Derek kept her talking about memories and plans for the holidays, while Detective Wolf monitored her location through her cell phone signal with the help of Arizona police. I watched the clock tick forward, watched Derek perform normalcy while knowing that police were already moving through the airport terminal looking for his sister. Finally, Wolf nodded at him and Derek said goodbye, his voice cracking slightly on the last word. 10 minutes later, Detective Wolf's phone rang again. She's in custody, Wolf said after hanging up. Officers approached her at the gate. She tried to board, but they stopped her. Carry-on bag full of medications that weren't prescribed to her. Insulin, potassium chloride, digoxin, several others. Looks like she was planning to dispose of evidence. The detective's expression was grim. We've got her. The next several hours were a blur of statements and paperwork. I walked Detective Wolf through every piece of evidence I'd compiled, gave her the names and contact information for every family member I'd spoken with, provided copies of all my documentation. Derek sat next to me in a chair against the wall, not speaking, just staring at nothing while his brain tried to process what his sister had done. I could see him shaking slightly, could see the moment when shock gave way to grief and anger and betrayal all at once. The case came together fast after that. Gerald Kaufman survived because paramedics had found him in time, and his toxicology showed massive levels of insulin that would have killed him within hours if left untreated. Detective Wolf got a warrant to exhume my grandmother's body, and the toxicology report came back 2 weeks later showing the same thing. Lethal levels of insulin that Ruth had never been prescribed, plus blood thinners at doses that would have accelerated her death. The medical examiner determined that while Ruth had been dying of natural causes, Vanessa had hastened her death by at least several days, maybe a week. They exhumed Patricia Lowell's body next and found lethal levels of potassium chloride that had been dismissed at the time as natural electrolyte imbalances in a dying woman. Gregory Chen's body showed massive doses of thyroid medication that had caused his cardiac arrest. The supplements from the gym had been spiked with levothyroxine at doses 50 times higher than therapeutic levels. 3 more bodies were exhumed from Vanessa's past, people I'd found in my research who died under suspicious circumstances after contact with her. All of them showed evidence of medication poisoning. When they searched Vanessa's apartment in Arizona with a warrant, they found her laptop. On it was a spreadsheet that made me physically ill to read. 12 names. 12 people she'd tracked, studied, and methodically killed. Each entry had detailed notes about their medical conditions, their medications, their vulnerabilities. She'd calculated drug interactions and lethal doses. She'd documented her access to each victim and the methods she'd used. And worst of all, she'd written about her own reactions to the deaths. Patricia was perfect. One entry read, got 147 comments and so much sympathy at church. People kept telling me what a good heart I have. The attention lasted for weeks. Another entry about Gregory. The widow hugged me at the funeral and thanked me for being such a good friend to him at the end. The grief highs are getting better each time. For my grandmother, finally did someone close to the family. Derek will have to pay attention to me now. The Facebook post was risky, but the rush of posting before she died was incredible. 284 comments so far. The psychiatric evaluation revealed what they called a malignant hero complex combined with extreme narcissistic personality disorder. Vanessa had started in pharmaceutical sales genuinely wanting to help people, the psychiatrist explained, but at some point she'd discovered that she got more attention and emotional satisfaction from comforting people during death than from helping them live. She'd become addicted to the sympathy and attention she received when someone died, to being the caring figure who'd known it was coming, who'd been there at the end. So she'd started creating situations where she could be that figure. It had begun with elderly hospice patients, where she'd simply accelerated an inevitable death by a few days or weeks. But the attention had been so intoxicating that she'd escalated, moving to healthier victims, people she actively murdered just to feed her need for grief-related attention and the feeling of power that came from controlling life and death. The Facebook posts timed before deaths were part of the thrill for her, the psychiatrist said. They made her seem psychic or specially connected, which garnered even more attention and made her feel unique and important. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Derek testified, and I sat in the gallery watching him break down on the stand as he talked about our grandmother's final hours. How Vanessa had looked him in the eye while Ruth was dying and had pretended to grieve alongside him while knowing she'd caused it. How she'd given that speech at the funeral full of lies about their closeness. how she'd collected sympathy and attention while Ruth's body was still warm in the ground. The jury saw the spreadsheet, heard from the medical examiners, listened to testimony from family members of all 12 victims. Vanessa showed no emotion through most of it. She sat at the defense table in tasteful clothing with her hair pulled back, looking more like she was attending a business meeting than her own murder trial. Her lawyer tried to argue that the spreadsheet was creative writing, that the medications in her possession were samples she'd forgotten to return to her company, that the Facebook posts were just unfortunate coincidences. But the evidence was overwhelming. The pattern was undeniable. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before coming back with guilty verdicts on 7 counts of first-degree murder and 4 counts of attempted murder. The other victims' cases couldn't be prosecuted due to lack of physical evidence after too much time had passed, but everyone in that courtroom knew she'd killed all 12. The judge sentenced her to life without parole. When asked if she had anything to say, Vanessa stood and looked directly at Derek. "I'm not sorry," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. "Not really. You all want to make me into a monster, but I just wanted to matter. I wanted people to see me and care about me. Nobody paid attention when I was just doing my job, being normal, following the rules. But when people died, everyone cared. Everyone noticed me. Do you know what that feels like? To finally be seen? If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.